Hello everybody, welcome back to Access Blockbusters. Guys, it has been a little bit since we've done a sit-down podcast episode. I'm so excited though to be doing one of these because honestly, I've been really happy with the way that the MCU Phase 4 rewatch videos have been turning out and just the way that you guys have been reacting to them. So first of all, before we get into this podcast episode, I just want to say thank you guys so very much for just the support and the feedback and the comments and everything that you guys have been leaving throughout the MCU Phase 4 rewatch series. It has just been fantastic, and those videos were just a joy to put together, and I truly had the best time making those videos. But again, it's been a while since we've done a podcast episode, and so I'm very excited to kind of get back into this and just sit in front of the mic and talk for a little bit and, hopefully interact with you guys in the comments down below about all these different topics. As you guys can probably see from the title of this podcast episode, there are a few things that have been going around that we will talk about. Some may be a little more controversial than others, some that probably will elicit some discussion. So I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say about all these different things. But again, just a little bit up front, just to say thank you guys so much for just the warmth and the kind reception you guys have been giving to these MCU Phase 4 rewatch videos. Okay, with all that out of the way, and I know you guys have been indulging me for a minute or so now, but if you will just indulge me for a little bit longer, I'd like to share before we kick it off into these topics that we're going to be discussing on today's episode of the Access Blockbusters pod, just some updates that I like to give usually once or twice a year around the summertime, and where I kind of discuss what my plans are for the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel for the foreseeable future. And usually they've been yearly because summer is the time where I can kind of recalibrate and think about what I want the Access Blockbusters channel and the podcast to look like going forward. And this year, the updates going forward, I'm very excited to share about them. I'm a little nervous, but I think that as we kind of get back into the swing of things here, I think that things are going to be, they're going to be exciting. And I hope that you guys will be along for the ride as well. So, with all that being said, I wanted to talk about what Access Blockbusters will look like for the foreseeable future. So, for those of you who have been, around the channel for a long time, this YouTube channel has, really started out with this idea of rewatch series, right? I started out during the pandemic talking about the MCU Infinity Saga and going through each one of those films, rewatching them, talking about what I thought about them and what I liked, what I didn't like, and just trying to get a fresh perspective on each one of those films. And then we'd do a little bit of a ranking, tier lists, doing some video essays at the end of those series and whatnot. And so that was really the inception of the channel. At the time, I didn't have a super clear idea of where I wanted the channel to go. And it was just sort of something that I thought would be fun to do. Little did I know that would kind of be the nature of the channel as we move forward. So obviously, as we've gone through the last 3 or 4 years, I guess, the YouTube channel is over 4 years old now, which is a crazy thing to say. But we've kind of maintained that in waves here and there. So what I've been doing is every sort of summer, we've been doing the Access Blockbusters pod, which has been really fun for me to do a kind of on a weekly, semi-weekly basis. And then throughout the fall, winter, and spring, we've been doing these rewatch videos where I, talk about a different series. So we started out with the Infinity Saga. Then we moved to Spider-Man, which we completed before No Way Home, which was really exciting. Then we did Star Wars, which I had a lot of fun with. And finally, we just did Phase 4 of the MCU. And honestly, I never really expected this to be a big part of what my channel was, but it's been really refreshing to go back and watch some of these properties for, not for the first time, but obviously even for the second time or even for the 10th time, but just get a new perspective on things that, at the time, right, when you watch these things for the first time, there's a lot of baggage around these different movies and shows. And baggage isn't necessarily a bad thing, honestly. It can be a very positive thing. It can get you excited for a film to the point where you kind of, maybe you don't like it as much the next time because you were just kind of caught up in the wave, which I don't think is a bad thing at all. But it is, it is something to acknowledge. Or it can be negative, right? It can be, all these expectations and it let you down, but then later on you kind of realize, oh no, this is much better than I thought. So, these series of videos have been a chance for me to really just take a step back, from all of that expectation and all of everything that was going on at the time, and just sort of give another perspective on these different projects, and it's been really fun to do. So that being said, the rewatches will not be going away. You guys seem to be really enjoying them, and it's something that I enjoy doing as well. And so long as I have the time to rewatch these different projects and kind of see what they're about, because obviously the biggest thing about these is time. You got to invest some 2 hours into watching a particular movie, or even 6 or 7, 8 hours to watching a show. And that's really the biggest barrier, right, to making these videos consistently. But that being said, it's been really enjoyable, and I don't want to stop doing them. But acknowledging that as the months will progress into this this summer and into the fall, and then in the foreseeable future, time is not going to be something that is particularly on my side, which is okay. Life gets busy and things change. But I do want to keep doing these rewatch videos, or just rewatching things, right, and talking to you guys about them. On the other hand, the flip side of that coin is what I also have been thinking a long time about is the podcast, this Access Blockbusters pod, because while I've only been really able to do them in the summers, they've been a source of a lot of joy for me. I've really enjoyed being able to do them. I've really enjoyed just being able to sit down with you guys and just talk about things that are coming out, movies that I've watched recently, shows that I've watched recently, and just really talk about it, all these things in a whole variety of ways that I really wasn't able to in these videos that honestly took a lot of pre-production and a lot of, recording and editing production. And so they had to be planned well in advance for them to even be coming out in sort of a semi-regular manner. And they've been coming out every other week. But I enjoy the podcast because it allows me to talk about things that have been coming out recently. And we'll talk about, Inside Out 2, and we'll talk about The Acolyte and other things like that. And so those two things have been top of mind for me, right? So here's what's going to happen on the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel. I know I've been talking for about 7 minutes now, and I don't want to keep dragging on because we do have a lot of things to talk about otherwise. But here's what's going to happen. So I will this episode will come out on June 22nd, 2024, if not the 23rd, but sometime this weekend. And then I will actually be traveling, so I will not be able to record anything live or talk about anything in advance. But what I have done is I've recorded 3 or 4, maybe 4 or 5 different podcast episodes that we'll be releasing over the next few weeks. And the traveling lined up in such a way, and I really didn't plan it like this. You just, when something like traveling is coming up, you really just don't plan around things like movies. But it worked out this way where I'll be returning just in time for Deadpool and Wolverine. And so what we'll be doing is I'll be releasing these, 3 or 4, 5 different podcast episodes every week. And they'll be on a topic that won't necessarily be on, recent events or current movie news, but we'll be talking about a particular topic that I think is interesting and top of mind. So those will be going up over the next month or so. And then when I'll be coming back, I'll be doing a podcast episode about Deadpool and Wolverine, specifically my expectations, what I want to do. It's not what I want to do. What I'm hoping for. If you're just getting ready for Deadpool and Wolverine, so that'll be coming out. And then I'll be watching Deadpool and Wolverine, and we'll be doing a spoiler discussion. We'll be doing a non-spoiler review, and we'll be talking about Deadpool and Wolverine hopefully in all of its glory. And that is the plan through I guess the end of July. Now, heading into August and September, August might be a little bit more sporadic, as I will be going through some life changes and working through those. And so August might be a little bit more sporadic. I'm going to try to get at least 1 or 2 podcast episodes every other week, if not every week, but I don't know if every week is super viable. We'll see about that. But in August, that will be the plan. But hopefully starting in September, what will be happening is that I will be, getting back to regular podcast episodes. And so while I have really enjoyed making these edited YouTube videos where it's kind of pre-recorded narration, and then I take the time to put clips over the top and everything like that, just frankly, kind of taking a peek behind the curtain, these videos take a long time to make. Even a 10 to 12 minute video will take a few hours to make. And so with my interest also in just reviving the podcast and making it a more regular part of this YouTube channel, I've decided to, for now, make podcasting the primary primary medium through which my content will be made. Doesn't mean that I won't be making edited YouTube videos here and there. I think I will be. They'll probably be a little bit shorter. If there's something breaking that I want to talk about that's relevant, or if something like that happens, then I'll definitely be making an edited YouTube video here and there. But the podcast will be the weekly podcast, and I'm aiming for Saturday releases. But you guys will have to let me know if you want a different day, or if something else works better for you. But I'm going to be aiming for a Saturday weekly release where we talk about, just catch up on the week, talk about things that have come out. If I've seen a movie on Friday, or if I'm going to see a movie, on Saturday, might be coming out on Sunday, all that kind of stuff, where I, just a time to catch up. Going back to the rewatches, though, there will be weeks where I frankly won't be able to put out a weekly podcast episode, and that's fine. Life happens. And again, like I've been maintaining, all this time, the podcast and this YouTube channel as a whole, I don't want it to become work. I don't want it to become stressful in a way that, stress is fine in the sense that, you want to get out YouTube videos on a consistent basis, but I don't want it to become an overwhelming stressor on my life, because that's just not what this is meant to be. And so there will be weeks where, I won't be able to make a weekly podcast episode, and that's totally fine. Instead, what I'll be aiming to do is then I'll have an archive of ready to go podcast episodes. I've already recorded a couple. They're very exciting. I'm very excited for you guys to see them, hopefully in the next coming months, where I'll be embarking upon various rewatch series going forward. And so the latest one that I've started upon, and I hope you guys will be excited about this, because again, I always try to make these rewatch series relevant to what's going on now. We did Spider-Man Before No Way Home. The Star Wars one was a little bit just more for fun, but the Spider-Man one, again, was No Way Home. MCU Phase 4 was kind of in the middle of Phase 5, and this one is the DCEU. I think it's about time that we look back on the DCEU, especially now with the introduction of the DCU coming in December 2024 with Creature Commandos, but really officially next July with Superman. So that's really exciting for me. I've already recorded Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, and I'm working on the post-production for those podcast episodes. So really excited for you guys to see those. And yeah, if I'm not able to put out a weekly podcast episode, then those will be the podcast episodes that will be coming out. And hopefully in that way, we'll be getting a podcast episode every single week. And yeah, I'm really hopeful that will be sort of the way that the YouTube channel, it becomes sustainable, still remains enjoyable for me, but at the same time is something that you guys will want to hear. So again, I've been talking about myself. I've been talking about this channel for way too long on this podcast episode. There are time codes in the description if you guys want to jump around and look at them. But yeah, I really appreciate all of you guys. I hope you guys are excited about all these different plans. And yeah, that's enough about me. Let's actually get into the topics for today. So we have 5 different things I want to talk about. The first one is pretty short. It just came out this morning. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So, well, I guess Avengers 5 is something that we haven't really been talking about on this YouTube channel with the Phase 4 rewatch videos, but it's something that has been up in the air ever since the whole Jonathan Majors drama, which we're not going to really touch upon here. All to say is that Avengers 5 is no longer called the Kang Dynasty officially, but there are still rumors going around that Kang will be a part of it. There are also new rumors, though, going around that this will be just a more ensemble cast. I believe there was a rumor going around that said something like 60 MCU characters will be reprising their roles. So it's not entirely clear whether Avengers 5 will be a smaller scale kind of Avengers film, doesn't seem like it, or if it'll still be a huge, epic kind of Infinity War level Avengers film. It's almost like comparing it to, is this going to be an Age of Ultron with, yes, it's big in scope and it's epic and everything like that, but still kind of self-contained to about 10 Avengers, or is this going to be an Endgame Infinity War situation? It looks like we're leaning towards the latter, even though it doesn't look like this film is going to be as pivotal to the story of the multiverse saga anymore. We'll see about that, though. But Avengers 5 was always going to come. And again, the MCU is going through a bit of a trial phase right now, where Kevin Feige finally has his authority back. It looks like quality control is going to be a big thing moving forward. Deadpool and Wolverine looks like it's going to kickstart that, and then you got Captain America: Brave New World, which is hopefully going to be another successful hit after undergoing a lot of reshoots and rewrites. Thunderbolts also looks like it's promising. We'll talk about Blade. We'll definitely talk about Blade later on in this video, in this podcast. But the Fantastic Four looks promising. They look like they're excited about Agatha. So a lot of different things going on about MCU right now. But Avengers is their brand, right? Avengers is the thing that will get people to come watch their properties. And so it's interesting that they are going to continue on with Avengers 5 while still kind of being nebulous about what their overall story is with the multiverse saga. We'll see what it ends up being, whether or not it's super connected to Secret Wars, or if it's just sort of more of a kind of a team up movie, which I still think is fine. Like if it's not really leading up to Secret Wars and it's more just sort of a standalone Avengers film, that's great, because I've been maintaining we need to see some of these characters outside of their little pockets of the universe. I'm talking about your Eternals and your Werewolf at Nights by Nights and your Moon Knights and She-Hulks and all these different other characters that have just sort of been isolated into their little corners of the MCU thus far. So really excited about that. One actor that I think we would have all guessed would be one of the returning Avengers to the ensemble, but also probably one of the leading Avengers is Benedict Cumberbatch's Doctor Strange. And in fact, I might have even guessed that we would have gotten a Doctor Strange film, a third one, before Avengers 5, although maybe now that's going to happen between Avengers 5 and Avengers 6. But, I mean, just the setup between him and Clea at the end of Doctor Strange 2, although we could have a whole separate discussion about the end credit scenes these days in the MCU and how they're not really leading to anything anymore. That being said, though, Doctor Strange was definitely always going to be one of the characters that was going to appear in the next Avengers film. And Benedict Cumberbatch has all but confirmed that by going on an interview. And I'm paraphrasing here, but he said basically, I'm really excited to get started on Avengers next year. So yeah, I mean, in terms of news, this isn't really newsworthy in the sense that Benedict Cumberbatch is returning as Doctor Strange for the next Avengers film. Maybe it's an indication, maybe it's a very strong indication here that Doctor Strange 3 will not be happening before Avengers 5. So if that's something that, if you thought that it was going to take the February 2026 slot in front of Avengers 5 in May of 2026, then perhaps this is confirmation that that is not going to happen. But also, I think the biggest piece of news out of this little quote here is that Avengers 5 is still on track. So despite everything that's been going on, and despite the struggles of the MCU, and the fact that all these different characters have really not been meeting up and have not, had reasons to team up with one another, they're still going to be in an Avengers film, we think. Doctor Strange will be, but we'll see about the rest of them. But also that it seems like it is on track for that May 2026 release date, which I even thought was in jeopardy for a while because... if you remember, I think it was Avengers 5 was going to be next year, May 2025. And I think Secret Wars was actually going to be November 2026. So it's kind of crazy or November 2025. So it was kind of crazy to think that at Comic-Con a couple years ago, we would have gotten both Avengers films next year, I think, which is crazy to think about. But anyways, yeah, I mean, there's, definitely a lot to chew on there. But, one thing to think about here is that, yes, it looks like Avengers 5 is going to be on track for its May 2026 release date. Again, whether or not this is going to be a straight lead-in to Secret Wars or whether it's going to be sort of just another building block towards the endgame of the multiverse saga, no pun intended, we'll have to see. But it looks like everything is on track for an Avengers 5 film in 2026. So that is pretty exciting. Okay, let's move on to the next topic here, which is shifting from the MCU to now DC, but not the DCU. Let's shift our attention over to the Penguin. Now, for those of you who have been watching the channel for a little bit of time, you'll know that I was a huge fan of the Batman as a standalone Batman film. It was definitely, and I've rewatched the Dark Knight trilogy somewhat recently, and obviously, if you dislike the Nolan Batman films, obviously nothing wrong with that, but there are very few people who, as a whole, really dislike the three films in the Nolan Batman trilogy as a whole. That being said, I was really excited for the Batman to come out when Matt Reeves was going to direct it with Robert Pattinson. He looked great in the suit. And by the way, that Batman suit is still, I think, it's the best Batman suit that's ever been put to live action. I maintain that. It's grounded enough. It looks like armor, but it looks still comic booky and Batman-y enough, which I love about that. One of the surprising things about that film, though, was Colin Farrell's Penguin, because he looked great in the role. The prosthetics looked great. He had a really strong screen presence, and it's Colin Farrell. He's an Academy Award-winning actor. And so when they announced that they were going to be doing a Max series about the Penguin, I thought that was interesting. I think it's interesting that with all of the sort of backlash that doing streaming series has had over the past few years. And I'm not talking about streaming series in general. I'm talking about streaming series within cinematic universes. So, for example, I mean, we just have to look at Marvel, right? It's been interesting because it just doesn't seem like that strategy is working very well with the MCU. You do a series like Ms. Marvel, which for the most part, obviously not everything. You can go check out my rewatch video for that on the channel now. But with Ms. Marvel, it was a character that was generally beloved, right? Whatever you think about the series as a whole, the character was really well received, and then you put her in a film like the Marvels, and it doesn't do well. It doesn't do well for a whole host of factors at the box office that aren't just due to Kamala Khan. And in fact, I would argue that Kamala Khan probably boosted the box office a little bit, but still, I mean, just case in point is that putting these streaming characters on a film and vice versa, where you have, for example, even a Wanda Maximoff who kind of turns heel at the end of WandaVision and then becomes the villain in Doctor Strange: The Multiverse of Madness. People were kind of confused if they hadn't seen WandaVision. So it's interesting to me that DC now is doubling down on this strategy, both in the DCU, where James Gunn has said we're going to do animated and live action series that are, in continuity with the DC. We'll have to see how he handles that, right? If they're going to bring TV characters over into the movies and vice versa. But not only that, we're going to be doing that as well with their other adjacent Elseworld properties in the DC universe. And the Batman universe is certainly one of them. Maybe it'll work a little bit better because, these Batman saga films can kind of stand on their own while the series can kind of be auxiliary to that as well. We'll have to see about that. So I think this will be a big test. Obviously, as Max is also kind of branching out with even a franchise like Dune, with The Prophecy being another series that goes out there. About the Bene Gesserit, so that's really exciting as well. But it's sort of at a crossroads here, where we're starting to slowly see the results of how mixing film and TV within the same franchise is working out. That being said, though, just taking a look on at its own merits, right? The Penguin is a character that I think is fascinating, endlessly fascinating, especially the way that he was built up in the Batman film, where he was this crime boss, but he was kind of he was under the foot of the Falcone family. And kind of got out at the end of it, and sort of is now looking to become the head of Gotham City's crime world, which I think is a great place for him to kind of be that new head of the crime world in the Batman Part 2 by the time that film comes out, which, by the way, side note, on its own is being delayed to October 2026, I believe. So that's going to be a ways away. But in the meantime, we'll get The Penguin, which is coming out in September 2025. And on top of that, we just got a new trailer. So again, everything that has come out of this Batman universe, and granted it's only been that one film and then some other promo material from the Penguin, but everything that's come out of this universe has been fantastic. I've loved every second of it. The aesthetic is it's gritty and it's grounded, which I know is an overused phrase when we're talking about DC, but it works within this universe because it feels more fitting for this version of Batman, right? Where this Gotham City is sort of not talking about dark in tone, but dark in terms of even just the lighting and everything that's going on, where it's not muddled, right? It has a very distinct aesthetic. It's almost like there's an orangey kind of fiery glow to this city. I don't know how to explain it, but compared to the Snyderverse kind of Batman Gotham City scenes that we get in Batman v Superman, it has a very particular aesthetic to it, and I think that aesthetic leans itself very readily to a series like The Penguin. So in the trailer, we get to see more of Colin Farrell being Colin Farrell as the Penguin. He looks fantastic. We get to see even some shots of some other famous actors like Clancy Brown, who I love. But really what this story looks like it's going to be is Oswald Cobblepot is his name, I believe. Oz's ascension, right, to being that kingpin of the crime world in Gotham City, which I think is a fantastic idea for this story. And, especially doing something with Max, right, where Max is not afraid. I mean, if you've seen the catalog in Max, they're not afraid to make series that are gritty and dark, and go for it in a way that Disney Plus simply can't. Like, we all kind of hoped that the Book of Boba Fett would be this kind of gangster story with a crime syndicate, and it turned out just to be a very boring and lackluster series on Tatooine. And I think that you have this Penguin series here that has the potential, as we see in the trailer, with the Maroni family now and Falcone's So you have Sal Maroni in the series, and then you also have the son and daughter, I believe, of the Falcone of Carmine Falcone. And I think that's just super interesting because it looks like the daughter has a vendetta as well, whether it's against Oz or just sort of her own vendetta to kind of be at the top now is super fascinating to me. Obviously, all the connections here with Gotham City, with the flooding at the beginning of the trailer where you see Oswald kind of looking out and saying, that guy, who I'm assuming he's referring to Batman, could be the Riddler, but I think it's Batman, ruined the city. I love that. Just the aesthetic overall. It doesn't look like it's going to be the most, fun series to watch. And by fun, I don't mean engaging. I just mean, uplifting or anything like that. You don't really expect that from a series like this, though. I think what we're getting ourselves into is just a series that has a lot of intrigue, a lot of mystery, a lot of crime, a lot of thriller aspects in there. And I'm just super excited about that. I think that anything, especially with the long wait between the Batman and the Batman Part 2, it'll be 4 years, as assuming that everything is on schedule for the Batman Part 2, which is not a guarantee now, especially since it's been delayed. But assuming that everything's on schedule, anything to kind of satiate us in between the Batman Part 1 and the Batman Part 2, I'm really excited about. I was actually more excited about that Arkham series that Matt Reeves was going to develop, which apparently now is going to be part of the DCU, which I'm a little disappointed about because I thought that, if I was going to make a Max series to kind of go in between Batman 1 and Batman 2, I would have loved a series in Arkham where you kind of explore the Rogues Gallery a little bit. Whether or not he's still going to make an Arkham series that's also in the Batman universe, because it looks like now the one he's executive producing is going to be in the DCU. I don't know. But in the meantime, it looks like the Penguin is going to be just in line with the Batman in terms of just quality and tone and scope. And I just love that. So yeah, let me know in the comments if you guys are excited about the Penguin series, because I definitely am. All right, let's move on to the next topic here, and we're going to be talking about Blade, because Blade has been nothing short of a disaster. Not a single shot of this film has been filmed. And that is crazy because Blade was announced in 2019 at San Diego Comic-Con when the initial Phase 4 announcement was made. And that wasn't even all of Phase 4. That was like half of Phase 4 was announced up until Thor: Love and Thunder. And at the time, it was, Mahershala Ali gets on stage. All of them were wearing Blade hats, and they were saying, "Hey, this film's gonna come out in whenever." They didn't give a release date at the time, but they said Mahershala Ali is your new Blade, and they gave the logo and everything, and it was all great and it's all fine. And then it's been radio silent since then. And now we've gotten a new report here. I forget which site it's from, but one of the reputable ones, whether it's the Hollywood Reporter or Variety or Deadline, that really details what's been going on with the production of this film. And while I'm not going to go into all the specifics about this, I'll kind of talk about the major hitting, points that stand out here, because all of these articles do a great job of detailing the timeline here. I will go through a couple of the major pivot points here of what has been going on in this saga of this Blade drama. And then also, I actually kind of want to play a little bit of devil's advocate here and talk about why I think we shouldn't be maybe as worried as perhaps if in any other circumstance if a film had been delayed for 4 years like this. And also at the end of the day, why I still am skeptical that this movie will be released at all at this point. Although, again, we'll see. I mean, maybe skeptical is the wrong word. Maybe why I will be unsurprised if this film eventually does not release in its current form. We'll have to see about that though. But yeah, let's dig into this Blade saga just a little bit. So again, I'm not going to go through every single writer and every single director that has been announced and then left the project. But I mean, just to illustrate the point, right? My channel's been around for 4 years now, and this channel is old enough to have seen the announcement of the first Blade director, named Bassam Tariq, I believe. You can go check it out on my channel. That I had a podcast episode where I talked about Blade getting a director, and I thought at the time, great, I didn't know much about him, but it seemed like a great choice for Blade. We were moving on with the project. Now, this was, I believe, in around 2021. So at the time, it was like, yeah, okay, we're gearing up for the rest of Phase 4, and we're gonna get Blade eventually, maybe like 2022, 2023. So it's important to kind of just keep in the back of your mind that even in 2019, right, with that initial Phase 4 announcement, it wasn't like Blade was imminent, right? It wasn't like Blade was going to come out next year. It was going to come out probably at the end of that timeline. I mean, there's a reason that they didn't really even give a placement to Blade on that timeline. Nothing was really set in stone at that point. So I think that Blade, for what it's worth, was still going to be a couple years, maybe 2 or 3 years away from that San Diego Comic-Con announcement. That being said, Mahershala Ali at the time was almost 50 years old. I believe he was 49 when that announcement was made. So he wasn't, he in terms of superhero, right? He is certainly not the youngest actor in the world. He is certainly, though, a high quality actor. I mean, he is an Academy Award winning actor. He's won 2 Academy Awards, and also he's obviously been known to play ball in the genre film franchises. Obviously, he was in the Luke Cage series as Cottonmouth, I believe. And he's also currently filming the new Jurassic World 4 with Scarlett Johansson. So he is definitely, so if you're talking about a perfect blend of an actor who is high caliber, right? But also an actor who is so willing to be in these franchises, Mahershala Ali is definitely one of them. What this article details as well is that this is a unique situation in which Mahershala Ali himself, after I believe after winning one of his Oscars, basically went up to Marvel and said, hey, I want to do Blade. And Kevin Feige also really wanted to do Blade at that point. And so that was something where that came together. Not really, I suppose it's not really detailed in this article, but my assumption is that it wasn't really something that was specifically on the radar of the MCU, but it came together because of the actor and because of Kevin Feige. And so that's something to keep in mind as well. So then that all happened. 2019 happened. The COVID pandemic happened, and then we got our director announcement in 2021 or 2022, and then we were kind of moving off to the races after that. At that point, though, we had I believe we had a writer attached, but then that writer left, and so between that point and now, Bassam Tariq left the project. And we also had 2 or 3 different writers who were attached to the project as well, including Bo DeMeo, who was the writer for X-Men 97 and who recently just got fired by Disney for undisclosed reasons. And other writers, including Michael Green, was attached to write on the project as well. And finally, to this point, Eric Pearson, who has done a lot in the MCU thus far. He's almost like the MCU's ghostwriter, if you will. Not ghostwriter, ghostwriter. No pun intended there. But yeah, I mean, we've gone through tons of different writers as well. We also had a different director, Jan Demange, I believe, who was handpicked by Mahershala Ali, according to this report. And he... Basically, this report surfaced because Jan Demange just left the project. Although, I should say, it was reported that he just left. It was reported just now that he left the project, because it seems like from everything that we've heard, he left the project a while ago. So it wasn't like, he was attached yesterday and then he left yesterday. That's not at all what happened. So again, this interesting cycle of writers leaving, directors leaving, and Mahershala apparently being very unhappy with the project, as he sees this project as, and this is from the report, as his own version of Black Panther, being, I guess, sort of a touchstone in the comic book movie franchise, sort of a crown jewel in his resume, I suppose. It's not particularly clear if that's what he meant by that, but anyways, Black Panther being sort of the first superhero film to be nominated for Best Picture, or just a defining moment in the comic book movie genre as well. So there's that. And and also what we got out of this report is some story details, because apparently some of the earlier scripts had this film being a period piece set in the 1920s with Mia Goth, who is still attached to play a role in this film, but apparently she was going to be playing Lilith, a vampire who wanted the blood of Blade's daughter in the original version that was set in the 1920s. And now this has been scrapped, and now apparently what they're going to do is they're going to rewrite the film over the summer and then look for directors in the fall and begin shooting at that point, maybe early next year. Mahershala is apparently very unhappy with this, as I would be as well. It's an incredibly frustrating situation to be in. And also to note that this film will be taking in present day as of right now. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here, right? Because first of all, I've never seen a film like this in the MCU that's gone through this kind of turmoil. It seemed like the DCEU, just for comparison, obviously not entirely negative comparison. The reason I'm bringing this up is just because it seems kind of apt. It seems the closest to what's going on here with Blade. But the DCEU had its own version of this with The Flash, right? And The Flash did eventually come out. But if you guys remember that whole saga, I think Phil Lord and Chris Miller were originally attached to direct The Flash, and then it was going through all these other writers, and all these other, I think even Ezra Miller at one point wrote a version of the script for The Flash. So that was a film also that was, I think, announced in something like 2016, and it was going to come out in 2018, and it came out in 2023 with a completely different story probably, and a completely different set of writers, and a different director in Andy Muschietti at that point. So it's not like this doesn't happen in Hollywood, right? It happens to, the biggest and the wealthiest studios in the game. What's interesting about this, though, is that it hasn't happened to Marvel this publicly. And it is interesting to wonder if there is some correlation between this being a project where maybe it wasn't originally supposed to be as integral to the MCU until Mahershala Ali was the one who approached Kevin Feige about wanting to do the project. And I wonder if Kevin has any regrets about that. I don't know what the balance is of Kevin just wanting to do the project anyways, and then Mahershala approaching him. Because, again, we don't want to assume that it was just Mahershala saying, I want to do this project, and Kevin Feige being like, okay, whatever you want, because that doesn't really seem like something that Kevin Feige would do. That being said, though, I wonder about that in terms of if this was a factor that kind of led to this project being stuck in this place where it just doesn't seem like it's getting anywhere. Now, I said at the beginning of this segment that I wanted to play devil's advocate for a little bit here, and why we maybe shouldn't be as worried about this as we are. And let me be upfront and just say, before we kind of get into this devil's advocate, that this is a disaster for Marvel. It's not an unmitigated disaster. It's not like this is an abomination or anything like that. This film could certainly get made, and it could certainly be a good film at this point still. I have no doubt that if you get a good set of writers and a good director, and Mahershala is happy with the script, you could end up with a very good Blade film that comes out next year in November, I believe. That is 100% possible. That being said, this is, as it stands right now, this is certainly just a terrible look for Marvel right now, especially amidst all the other things that have gone on. But I do want to just point out a couple things here. And I think that context, as always, you guys who have been watching me for a while know that I'm a big, proponent of making sure you look at the context. I think context is super important when we're looking at something like this. So first of all, like I mentioned earlier on in the segment, Blade wasn't supposed to come out right after that announcement in 2019. I mean, there's a reason that they put everything else on that timeline. If you go back and watch the 2019 Comic-Con panel, Thor Love and Thunder was the last project that was there on that timeline. There's a reason that Blade wasn't on there, because probably at the time, Blade was just something that they had just signed Mahershala to, and they knew that they were going to do it eventually, right? So let's be clear here. Blade was not meant to come out like in 2020, COVID pandemic aside. It was not supposed to come out during the next few months after that announcement. It was probably going to come out, if anything, like 2 years later at that point. Then what did we have? We had a pandemic, right? Pandemic pushed back basically everything on that panel by a couple years. So that last project there, Thor Love and Thunder, came out in July of 2022. So, okay, Blade coming out later than that, like 2023, 2024, maybe 2023. Let's just say 2023. Then what did we have? So okay, first stumble here is that, yes, like if everything was going to plan, then I would assume that a Blade film would probably have come out in something like 2023, maybe right after Wakanda Forever or something like that, right? So I think that is sort of the first stumble here. But let's just say that, okay, we go through this first stumble here. What did we have at the end of 2023? We had a writers and an actors strike here. So the film is being delayed, right? It's not going to come out in 2023. They're working on the film, is what the report says, right? And then we have a writers and an actors strike, and then that, pushes back everything as well. Now, again, I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit here just for the sake of the argument. But, going back to the original article, yes, you have a writers and an actors strike, but other films in the MCU, such as Deadpool and Wolverine and such as a Captain America Brave New World, went right back into production right after the writers and actors strike. And so certainly if Blade was on track, right, then it definitely could have gone right back into production as well. So I'm not making excuses for the film, but I just want to say that it's not as if, we're looking at this timeline of Blade being announced in 2019 and then being released in late 2025, 2026 range as, just a crazy unprecedented thing, because we had some crazy unprecedented things happen in between those 2 points. We had the pandemic and we had the writers and actors strike, not to mention Kevin Feige losing control of his authority, over the quality of the MCU and having to put out like 6 Disney Plus shows a year or whatever it was at a certain point, which he is now scaling back, which is I think the reason why they're taking so much time with this Blade project, because Kevin Feige could have just put out a subpar 1920s period piece Blade film, but something tells me he just, as soon as he got that quality control authority back, he just wasn't happy with the way that Blade was turning out, and so he went back to the drawing board. I think that this is actually an encouraging thing here, because yes, I understand also from Mahershala Ali's perspective. He has every right to be frustrated with this process here. He's not getting any younger. He's still a phenomenal actor, but this was going to be a role that he thought would be defining for his career. I get that. I really do get that. At the same time here, I think that for the Blade project as a whole, we shouldn't be too discouraged about the fact that if this Blade film is going to come out, and I'm not too convinced that it will, because at a certain point, when is Kevin Feige going to say enough is enough, right? We've tried this in so many times. Perhaps this really just isn't fitting with the grander story of the MCU. Although I have my doubts about that, because you've set up a lot of supernatural characters here with your Moon Knights and your Werewolf by Night Man thing. Even Agatha Harkness, for example, that I think Blade does have a role to play in this sort of Midnight Suns sort of grouping of the MCU, which I think could be very interesting and very exciting. So that being said, if this Blade film comes out, which I would be unsurprised if it gets canceled at a certain point, but I also am thinking that it will come out eventually, sooner rather than later. But I think that there are a lot of extenuating circumstances that have delayed this film, but I think that everyone has a right to be frustrated. But I also think that we have every reason to believe that they are still working as hard as they can to bring us the best product that they can. Obviously, for those of us who have been waiting for a Blade film for a long time, this is not the most encouraging news, because it doesn't seem like this film is really gaining that forward momentum that it needs. And the day that it goes into principal photography, even then, I may not believe that this film is going to come out. And it was the same for The Flash, right? And The Flash eventually did come out. And say what you will about that movie, decent amount of people liked it. So I just think that, look, we have to take a look at the context, right? We have to make sure that we understand everything that's going on here. A lot of parties are frustrated by a lot of extenuating circumstances. At the end of the day, I think all that we can hope for is that this new plan, where they're going to rewrite the film, or they're working on a new script with Eric Pearson, kind of co-writing and editing it, and then they're going to look for directors, and hopefully by November 2025, we get a Blade film that we can all enjoy. Fingers crossed, because again, I hate kind of putting it in these terms here, talking about people's ages like this, but in terms of just physicality and superhero films, Mahershala Ali is certainly not getting any younger. He's in fantastic shape. So I'm not taking anything away from that. But at a certain point, you don't want like a 60-year-old, 70-year-old Mahershala Ali playing Blade. I don't think he wants that as well. So yeah, it's been a wild ride for this film, but I'm very hopeful that it will come out anyways. All right, guys, let's move on to the second to last topic here today. So the last two topics here are going to be discussions. I hesitate to say reviews, because I'm not necessarily reviewing these films as in, they just came out and I want to give you guys my fresh thoughts on. I've had some time to kind of marinate on my thoughts about these two different properties here. But we're going to be talking about Inside Out 2. Now, I don't know if I've mentioned this on the YouTube channel, maybe a long time ago. One of the first videos I actually did that really did well on the YouTube channel was a Pixar movies tier list. And I'm sure I mentioned it at the time. And I don't even know if I thought this at the time, but I've certainly come around to this point since then of Inside Out, the first Inside Out. I think it came out in 2016. Not only is one of my favorite Pixar films, in fact, it is probably my favorite Pixar film of all time. Inside Out 1 may be my favorite film of all time. And it's lofty praise, but I think that Inside Out was exemplary in just about every facet of filmmaking and storytelling that I can imagine. I know it's kind of weird to say because it's an animated film, but Inside Out 1 was this just beautiful blend of humor, entertainment, laughter, joy. I know it's ironic because we're talking about emotions here, but you felt every emotion in that film. When Bing Bong obviously dies and sacrifices himself, that's terribly sad, and I get emotional every time that scene comes up. But the scene that always gets me, more than any other scene, is when Riley comes home and she says she misses home. And what I think Inside Out 1 did so brilliantly is reflect the human experience back to us and say, this is what it's like to be human. This is, these are the struggles that we all face, and it's okay to face those struggles. It is okay to be sad. It's okay to miss home. It's okay to not be okay, which I know sounds like such a cheesy, Pinterest type quote or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's one of those movies that hits me in a way that almost no other movie can hit me. And Pixar movies, they're known for hitting you emotionally where they're supposed to hit you. But it is truly an example of a film that did it all for me. And so when they announced about a year ago that they were doing Inside Out 2, I was I was beyond nervous. I was so incredibly worried that this was going to be another cheap cash grab, which again, Pixar, I will say that even when Pixar decides to do cash grabs, they're usually not as bad as other studios, trying to do that, with banking off the success of a first film. Because obviously, when the first film does as well as it does, I believe the first Inside Out made $700 or $800 million, which is crazy, by the way, for an animated film. But when your films do that well, you're obligated to make a sequel, right? And sometimes you get sequels like I don't know what the name. I mean, even for example, like even in Avengers to Avengers Age of Ultron, where the sequel is good. It's pretty good. It's well received, everything like that. Sometimes you get a Transformers to a Transformers 2. Sometimes you get Toy Story, though, to Toy Story 2, where it's like, yeah, this is an incredible sequel to an incredible first film. So, again, going back to the track record of Pixar, they're not beyond putting out just sort of a mediocre sequel to a successful first film. I think about Cars and Cars 2, even Cars 3, which, weren't the most terrific sequels in the world to the first Cars film, which I don't even think is the best Pixar film, but I think it has its charm for sure. I don't think Monsters University was a cash grab per se, but I definitely think that it had room for improvement compared to the first Monsters, Inc. The one weird exception to this rule has been Toy Story 4 for me, which I kind of maintain that Toy Story 4 should not have been made, and yet the film that we did get was pretty fantastic, in my opinion. I still don't think it should have been made, but I'm not going to complain and say that, the film that we got is, just like it should not exist. So it's that film kind of represents a weird balance for me. But again, now seeing this whole Inside Out 2 coming out, and I was like, oh boy, here we go. Pixar just kind of going for that, IP recognizability again, especially with the lackluster box office success of their recent films. Although Elemental did quite well. I really liked Elemental, guys. I hope you guys can check it out on Disney Plus. Really good film. But yeah, I mean, I was really nervous. Even seeing those first trailers, I was very nervous because, I mean, yeah, Anxiety looked kind of goofy and cute or whatever, and I really liked Maya Hawke in Stranger Things 3 and 4. But I mean, especially when you make a sequel to one of your favorite films of all time, it's like, how can that possibly turn out well, right? And I know that's unfair because I'm the one who's out here saying you should always leave your expectations at the door and everything like that. And I get that. Like, how is that fair to a property to say, oh, look, it's going to be fine because, I mean, even if you don't like the sequel, then you always have the original, whatever. And I totally get that. But it's just this intangible sort of mental barrier where you're going into this film and you're like, it's just, how is it going to be, as good as the first film? But again, I went into Inside Out 2. I saw it the opening weekend, and I thought, okay, like whatever this film is whatever this film is going to be. And look, am I going to say that this is as good as the first film? I don't think so. It's not, in my opinion. But, I mean, it's really close. It's actually really close for me. And that on its own is just a feat of ingenuity. One other thing, by the way, before I get into this discussion here, and there will be spoilers for Inside Out 2, so if you haven't seen the film, just kind of make sure to come back later. There will be sort of, I guess, vague spoilers is what I will say. I'm not going to spoil major plot points. I'm not going to talk about the ending or anything like that, but just sort of, vague details about the film that maybe if you hadn't seen the trailers or didn't know that much about the movie, then you wouldn't know going into it. So, I will say one of the other things that made me a little bit nervous about the film going into it is that Pete Docter, who is, I think, actually my favorite director of all time, which is kind of strange because he only does animation, but he did Monsters, Inc., he did Up, he did Inside Out, and he did Soul. Pete Docter was not going to be returning to direct the film. It was going to be Kelsey Mann, I believe, who has done a lot of producing and animation from other Pixar films, but he hasn't himself directed a Pixar film. And so I was a bit nervous about that. But guys, I mean, in terms of what, because we talk about, I guess, in a way, sequels needing to justify themselves, which, I get it, right? The first film makes a lot of money, and so you want to go back into that world. And the world of Inside Out is just, it has endless possibilities. It literally has endless possibilities, right? But, kind of the thought of what does this second film need to do to kind of make itself set apart, right? What does it need to do to say, I am a film that, yes, I'm not just here to kind of justify the first film. I'm here on my own. And I realized by the time I walked out of the movie, the genius of these films, and actually surprisingly why I would advocate for at least one more Inside Out film, probably taking place, because this film takes place when Riley is going through puberty. I think she just turned 13. I might even advocate for one more film where she's maybe going to college or something like that. We saw that with Andy, right, in Toy Story 3, but I think that we could do one more film where she's going to college. The first one was when she was moving. I believe she was maybe 7, 8, 9, something in that range. Is that these films can speak to a different stage of your life in such profound and interesting ways. What was so brilliant about this film is that the first film deals with adolescence and growing up. And when you're growing up, right? I mean, everything, again, I understand that, this is sort of coming from a place of privilege, right? But like when you have a happy childhood, which I understand not everyone does, and I'm not trying to assume that everyone does, but just, for the sake of this analogy here, that you have a happy childhood and everything like that, and then suddenly something happens where it's like it all comes crashing down. And for Riley, it was moving away from home and not seeing her friends again. And it's that realization of having to grapple with the idea of sadness for the first time and what that means. And that's what makes that film so profound, because I believe, a lot of people, that at least a lot of my friends and I have gone through that same experience of you encounter something sad for the first time and it's like, oh, what do I do with that? Like, how do I deal with something like that? That's incredibly deep, but also a very human emotion, right? What this film does so expertly is it takes that and it's a different stage of life, but you're dealing now with anxiety, right? You're dealing with this idea of wanting to fit in, trying to find your place in the world, even though it might be a sort of quote unquote smaller world in high school, going from middle school to high school, your friends, your social status, everything like that. And it takes a different, that same kind of conceptual framework, right, of the first Inside Out, and puts it on a different stage of life. And I think that that's so brilliant. On top of that, one thing that actually another YouTube reviewer, I believe it was Christian Harloff, said in his review that I thought was actually so apt is that this film has a surprisingly good villain. And I think that, for those of you who haven't seen the film, I'm not going to say who the villain is, but I think that I wouldn't say villain, I would say antagonist, but I think that, the best, we always say this, right? The best antagonists, the best villains are the ones who do what they do because they truly believe in their mission, right? And the character that is really the antagonist of this film, because I believe that the first film, in a weird way, I almost think that Joy could have been kind of the antagonist figure, where it was sort of a journey of self-discovery for even Joy herself as a character, voiced by Amy Poehler, who does a great job in the second film, by the way. But first film didn't really have a clear antagonist. This film has an antagonist for sure, and that character, I think, is so driven though by a need to do the right thing, and yet just makes all of the wrong decisions. But you understand why, and I think that is such a good driver of the story. Now, I will say, and again, this is just minor spoilers, but does the film feel a little samey to the first film in terms of just plot structure? A little bit, yeah. Because, and if we're going to make a third film, I might advocate for kind of maybe going somewhere else, a different direction of being kicked out of the control room and then having to find your way back, basically, which I think you do see in the trailers a little bit. I mean, I think that we've seen that twice now, and it works here. It definitely works here, and it has its charm. But I think that hopefully, in terms of story, if we do see a third film, that we can go a little bit of a different direction than that. But that being said, it's just a minor nitpick. The heart that are in these characters, and what I love, especially about these characters here, is that we get a chance to dig into the emotions that were really not given a lot of time in the first film. So, characters like disgust and fear and anger. Anger especially was given a lot more character development. And by proxy, I think sadness was kind of pushed off to the side here a little bit. But, because the first film was such a profound focus on sadness, I think that that's okay for the character, honestly. And we get a focus here on the other emotions that we didn't get to interact with, as well as the 4 new emotions here, who are all fantastic. We got anxiety, ennui, which is there's a lot of fun to be had with that character's name, representing boredom, basically. Embarrassment and envy. They're really great. They're really fun new characters, and they represent a completely different side of the human brain as we begin to develop here. There are also some really cool new elements of, I think, life and just growing up, what you begin to develop in your mind as you grow up here. Because when you're a child, it's pretty simplistic. Emotions, I think, are pretty key driving factors. But one of the other big factors and key motivators in the film that, I won't spoil here, but one of the other things that's talked about a little bit here are the other things that begin to drive you, especially one in particular that is a core element of the film. But yeah, like what else drives you and motivates you and builds you, like makes you who you are as a human being, which I think is fantastic. But, I was thinking about this, right, as I close out my quick discussion here of Inside Out 2. And I realized that this is truly what peak Pixar is. And not just peak Pixar, because what peak Pixar represents is the best that storytelling has to offer, in my opinion. And I think that is truly reflecting the human experience in a way that is touching, that is funny, that is entertaining, but that is so true and raw and real in a way that might be emotional, right? But it's not like it ever hurts you in a way. It's just so honest in a warm way where we're dealing with these real experiences of anxiety, of sadness, these real human experiences. And yet they're dealt with in a way that's so heartfelt and so honest, that reflect what it means to be human. That's all wrapped up in this wonderful imaginative world that is, inside the brain of a child and the brain of a teenager. And I think that is just such peak storytelling, such peak Pixar. And look, based on this film alone, am I going to say they should keep making sequels for every single film that they have? No. And in fact, I mean, like I said, for as much as I loved or really enjoyed Toy Story 4, am I a little bit nervous that they're making Toy Story 5? Yeah, I am. If they start announcing a WALL-E 2 and Ratatouille 2, I'm going to be like, okay, maybe we should pump the brakes here. But I think that just all of that out of the way, just looking at this film alone, this is such a rich world and such a rich tapestry to tap into. And I think that's, it's fantastic what they were able to do with these characters and what they were able to do with this storyline. I think there is such untapped potential here for even a third film with this just looking into the life of a human being and seeing what it's like to just be you, right? I think that's really awesome. And again, as long as there's sort of a healthy ratio of original projects, because again, I mean, Inside Out 2, let's not forget, came from one of the most original projects that Pixar has ever made. So as long as there's a really healthy mix, I don't even know what the ratio would be, but maybe like 3 or 4 original projects to every sequel, I'd be totally fine with that, So yeah, I mean, those are my thoughts on Inside Out 2. It probably never could have lived up to the original in my head, but honestly, that's okay, because I think that what my experience was with the sequel was just about the next best thing. I loved this film. Let me know if you guys have seen it in the comments down below. All right, guys. And the last segment here on today's episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod is probably going to be the one that warrants and generates the most discussion, because we are going to be talking about The Acolyte. So hopefully at this point you guys have seen or haven't seen, but don't care about being spoiled about the first 4 episodes, the first half of this season of The Acolyte, because this will be a full spoiler discussion. So The Acolyte has been getting a lot of controversial shall we say, opinions being thrown around on the internet. Truly, have I not seen this kind of backlash towards a Star Wars project since The Last Jedi came out, which I, frankly, as somebody who loves The Last Jedi, but I understand there are people who really didn't like The Last Jedi, and there are people who have problems with it, legitimate problems with it, not just, critiques for the sake of being critical, but actually legitimate, dislikes about The Last Jedi. And that's totally fine, by the way. But truly have I not seen this kind of backlash for a Star Wars project since The Last Jedi. And it's frankly not a place where I enjoy being in the Star Wars fandom, because it's just a whole melting pot of negativity and anger, and just sort of really rage being directed towards this series. And before I even get to my own thoughts about this series, and I want to say here first, and I hate that I have to make this disclaimer because it should be obvious, but if you're here listening to this segment or this, portion of the podcast, and you're just going to, complain about The Acolyte because of who the characters are inherently, or who the actors are inherently, or anything like that, I mean, this is just not the place for that. I have my problems with the first 4 episodes of of the Acolyte for sure, and I completely respect if you just hate the show. That being said, if you hate the show, and just please make sure that it's rooted in actual criticism about the story or about choices that the characters are making, the writing, the dialogue, and just none of this nonsense about just against certain people that are in the show or the actors or all of that kind of stuff. It's just ridiculous, honestly, at this point. So again, I know I've made this disclaimer a couple times before in other videos. I remember, speaking of The Last Jedi, I had to make this disclaimer in front of The Last Jedi about all the hate that Kelly Marie Tran was receiving, which was just awful. And I want to say that that kind of discussion has no place on this channel. So I just wanted to put that out there. Anyways, though, like I said, I certainly have my problems with The Acolyte. And we will talk about them as well. But I also want to preface those by saying that I do believe we should be a little bit more patient with the show than a lot of people are being. So let's kind of dive in here. The Acolyte, again, is dealing with a time period that I was very interested in, which is prequels, right? While I think that, very far into the future is interesting, and it doesn't look like that's what they're going to do. It looks like they're just going to go right into Rey's Jedi Academy or whatever for episode 10. That's fine, whatever. Far into the future is interesting, but I've always been very interested in the lore and the mythology of the Star Wars universe. And so the idea that James Mangold film, which was going to be the Dawn of the Jedi and the Dawn of the Force or whatever, super interesting to me. And while the High Republic is not super far back into the Star Wars lore, it was pretty far back, right? And so I was very interested in this time period and in this show. Also, the fact that the trailers, I know a lot of people really hated the trailers. I was not one of them. I thought that the trailers were great. I don't quite get what the complaints are, at least in the trailers, about the visuals, because I thought that they looked fine. I think a couple of them looked very clean, if that's what people were complaining about. And yeah, I mean, sure, you can kind of tell that they're in the volume a couple times, but the trailers I was a big fan of. And I was just excited to see a cast of new characters. I mean, Lee Jung-jae is a fantastic actor. I loved him in Squid Game. Haven't seen a lot of the other actors, other than, Carrie-Anne Moss, for example, in The Matrix, but Amandla Stenberg I haven't really seen a lot of. I guess I actually found out recently that she was Rue in the Hunger Games, though, which was really just I don't know, fun fact if you guys didn't know that. That was a long time ago. But anyways, yeah, I mean, I was just excited to see a whole different side of the Star Wars story, So we get into The Acolyte, right? And the first 2 episodes, which were released at the same time, were kind of being, they were built up, right? And it seemed like the first couple episodes, people were a little bit hesitant on. Like, they were like, okay, right? Like, we're getting these episodes that have, certain problems with them, but definitely, have some potential. Was what the common consensus seemed to be from those first 2 episodes. And I would agree with that sentiment, actually. I think that the first 2 episodes presented us with a decent bit of potential. And, I mean, I personally, and again, big spoilers for the first 4 episodes, I saw that twin twist coming from a mile away. As soon as she woke up, as soon as, May has that fight with Indara, Carrie-Anne Moss, and well, actually, I'll get back to that in a second. But as soon as she has that fight, and then the title card comes up, and then Osha wakes up, I was like, either there's a hallucination going on, or it's the same person, which I doubted, as she kind of moves around, or they're twins, which I was like, okay, that's interesting, makes some sense to me. Let's see where this goes from here. By the way, Lee Jung-jae from the beginning, really great. I know that this was his first major English speaking role. Does a fantastic job. You can kind of tell a little bit here and there, but for not really speaking English, fantastic job. I want to go back to Indara for a second, though, because I understand, right? There's, if, for example, if there's a major actor in a show or a story that you are looking forward to, being there, Carrie-Anne Moss being, one, for example, in The Acolyte. If there's a major actor that you're looking forward to being in your favorite show or in a new, property and franchise you love, I get it, right? When May kills Indara in the first 10 minutes of the show, 5 minutes of the show, I can imagine people being like, wait, what? And again, even, I even get that despite the fact that Indara comes back in flashbacks. Totally get that, right? It's something where, I understand how it could be a huge disappointment. For me personally, though, and I admit, Carrie-Anne Moss was not really the huge drawing point for me in the show, but I will say that you do what you do for the sake of the story, right? And if Carrie-Anne Moss was like, sign me up for this role, I get it, my character's gonna die, quote unquote, in the first episode, and then she'll be back in flashbacks. I get it, let's do it. You do what you need to do for the sake of the story. Like, I'm just imagining if that X character was replaced by anybody else, right? Like any other actress, for example. For the sake of the story, it's fine. It makes sense why that's happening that way. I think we can lament that later, right? For example, in the flashbacks, if in Dara, if Carrie-Anne Moss was giving this fantastic performance or whatever, or even in in later projects where it's like, man, I wish Carrie-Anne Moss was, whatever. But even then, it's like there are so many capable actresses and actors out there who could fill roles that I just think that, look, you do what you have to do for the sake of the story. Now, if it was a dumb story decision to kill off a character like that, like for example, I'm just thinking of X-Men: The Last Stand, right, where you kill off Cyclops and you kill off Professor X, and it's like, okay, like, did that really need to go the way that it did? Not really, no. And that to me is a little bit different than what went on here. But for me, I don't really have a problem with Indara and Kelnaka being killed off the way that they were, to kind of build the stakes of the story, right? To say that, look, May and or whoever is killing whoever killed Kelnaka, whoever it is under that mask, there is a real danger here. There's a real threat going on in the beginning. Like, we're not afraid to kill off our main characters here. So, I understand if a lot of you guys are disappointed by that, but for me, that's not something that particularly bothered me. Now, we go on through the beginning of the first couple episodes here, right? And we're getting this backstory of May, beginning to hunt for these 4 Jedi. Here we get some hints about this fire that's haunting Osha. We find out at the end of episode 2 that Osha didn't know, or May didn't know that Osha was alive. And we get a host of other kind of auxiliary High Republic characters. I will say that the actress who's playing Vernestra in the High Council, probably my least favorite character. I'm not trying to bash on the actress, but the way that she's delivering her dialogue is just, I don't know, it's really not hitting me in the right way. And I will say that overall, in the first 4 episodes, the dialogue is definitely probably the weakest part of the story for me. There are just a lot of lines that are just so exposition heavy and are so in your face about what they're talking about, especially Vernestra talking to Sol. I mean, a lot of those lines are just really cringeworthy. Even some of the conversations that Osha has later on with Yord and with Jecki, who's played by Daphne Keane, it's just, it just feels a little bit over the head. And I know a lot of people have also said, well, I guess that's kind of just the way that the prequel writing is. I get that as well. But still, it feels like a little bit of sloppy writing, if that makes sense. But it's not, for me, I mean, it's frustrating, but it's not enough to kind of derail my enjoyment of the show. So yeah, we get on with the story. We have, at the end of episode 2, I believe we have this sort of cliffhanger of this Sith Lord, or this whoever that that other guy is or person is under that mask, and we kind of move on from there. So by the end of episode 2, Indara is dead, and Torben is dead, and then episode 4, Kelnaka is dead, and episode 3 is that big flashback episode, which a lot of people were very unhappy with. And I will say, yes, the witches are a little bit goofy. Power of 1, Power of 2, yeah, a little bit weird and goofy and not my favorite thing. But I did, really enjoy the interactions between Osha, the young Osha, and Sol when they first meet. And I think that the intrigue behind the fire and everything like that is something that will keep me interested. Episode 4 was fine. Episode 4, you kind of, it's a very short episode, and so I, wasn't super happy about that. I'm also not super thrilled about the idea of Kymir being the Sith Lord or being the Acolyte himself, if that is some version of Plagueis or if he's just a random Sith, because it seems like he is involved in this plot somehow as well. So I'm not, I'm also one of those people who's not particularly thrilled about that idea. As well. So here's what I will say. And there is one other thing, by the way. Let me just talk about this really quickly before I get into why I think we should be a little bit more patient with this show than a lot of people are giving it credit for. And that's just my personal opinion, by the way. But I wanted to talk about one other thing that bothered me a lot in because this segment isn't really a play-by-play of the first 4 episodes. It's really more of just what I wanted to talk about in terms of I think that I think that while we have a right to be very critical of this show in terms of the things that they haven't done well, in terms of writing and dialogue and visuals and whatnot and story, I think that we should be patient. I also think that there are legitimate criticisms to be had about this show. But again, it's not sort of a play-by-play on that. But I will say the one thing that really did bother me, and again, this could be explained later on, is May's really sudden turn to being this, she goes, oh, I had this vendetta against Kalnaka, but I'm just going to ditch that and whatever. So that's not, it wasn't the best execution of that scene in general. But here's what I will say about The Acolyte. This is a show that is being presented to us as a kind of unraveling of a mystery, right? And I know that for those of you who are unaware of this, maybe this will be helpful information, but I think a lot of us are aware of the fact that this is a show where we're going to be able to flesh out the events of what is happening, what's going on slowly. Like, it's not all going to be revealed to us at once. And so what I'm frustrated about, from the perspective of somebody who is like, okay, maybe I didn't love the first 4 episodes. I liked them with significant problems, but I am not convinced that this is going to be truly the representation of how I enjoy the show at the end of the day, because this is a show that is going to unravel itself slowly throughout the next few episodes. And in fact, I do believe that Leslie Headland, who is the showrunner of the show, said that episode 5 is going to be a very pivotal episode where we get to see the fire and what happens on Brendock from several different perspectives. And here's the key to that, right? Because everybody's out here complaining, how does this happen? Why is this happening? I don't get it. This doesn't make sense. All this kind of, like, for example, I don't know, how did May start the fire? Or, there are so many other things that are going on. Like, why does, May have this vendetta against these people? And what's going on here? And how is Osha this? And Soul this? And Indara this? And whatever. And my problem with that is that these people, and I'm not trying to, just pass judgment on all these, the people who are saying things like that. I just want to point out the fact that everyone who is saying this without the caveat that we haven't seen the whole picture, right? I actually had the same discussion with somebody about The Last Jedi, which was incredibly frustrating because this person that I was talking to had seen The Last Jedi, the whole movie. And we see this same technique in storytelling play out in The Last Jedi, where you have this scene, right, that's played out subjectively 3 different times, which is the burning of Luke's academy, right? We see it once from Luke's perspective, we see it once from Ben's perspective, and then we kind of see the amalgamation of both and what actually happened. And what was frustrating is that what this person that I was talking to was basically, he's someone who hates Luke in The Last Jedi, which, if you hate him in The Last Jedi, that's fine, that's whatever. I personally love him in The Last Jedi. Love the character progression in The Last Jedi, I should say, for Luke. But he was trying to base his argument off of Luke being a terrible person by trying to kill Ben Solo. And I was like, no, you have to look at what actually happened, right? In the whole context of those 3 individual scenes. And he told me he completely forgot that scene was played out 3 individual times. And that's my frustration with a lot of this commentary that's going on with The Acolyte, is that I think a lot of people are so ready to write off the whole story when we haven't seen it play out to fruition, right? Because I think that next episode, we're going to get a really full picture of what went on Brendock, why these characters are doing what they're doing, who the Sith Lord is, and all of that stuff that can be retroactively explaining what has gone on in the first 4 episodes. Now, to be clear, if you didn't like the way that the first 4 episodes were executed, regardless, it is completely your prerogative to stop watching the show, because that's the show's fault, frankly, for not engaging you enough to where, like, there are plenty of shows and movies that are mysteries, right? And they are confusing in the first beginning part of it, because obviously they're confusing because you're trying to figure out what's going on and who did what and whatever. But they're engaging enough that you're willing to be confused for a long time, that by the time like, they answer one question and they ask you 2 more until they get to the ending, right? And it is totally on the filmmakers and it is totally on the writers to engage you to that point. And if The Acolyte for the first 4 episodes hasn't done that, it is completely your prerogative to jump off the proverbial train, if you will, to get off the train, and not finish it, to its completion. That's totally fine, because that is on the show. But I think for those of us, or for those who are saying, I don't like this show because the story is, bad or whatever, I mean, that's fine. But I'm frustrated because this is a show that is specifically designed to reveal things in ways that are not meant to be all at once. So people who are like, I don't know, like it's stupid that Kelnaka is sheltered in the woods. Well, I mean, if you watch the trailers, and again, I'm not blaming you if you haven't seen the trailers, but just for an example, if you watch the trailers, there's a lot more to Kelnaka in those flashbacks that we're going to see that will explain that. Like it's just those kinds of things that are frustrating, that this is a story that isn't necessarily being told linearly. That I just wish that we all had maybe a little bit more patience for it, because I think that episode 5 in particular is going to explain a lot of what's been going on, and it's going to really flesh out why characters are doing what they're doing. Now, also, just in that same vein, because for me, I mean, I enjoy episodes 1 through 4. I'm not loving them, but I'm enjoying them enough to where I'm like, yeah, okay, episode 5, like, tell me what's going on. Because I think Leslie Headland has confirmed that episode 5 is going to be a key turning point for the series. That being said, if episode 5 is terrible, and if we get to the end of the show, right, and if they explain nothing, if the future flashbacks are all even more jumbled than the original flashbacks, and if the Sith Lord ends up being Chimera and it's terrible, yeah, I mean, of course, I'm going to hate the show, or, dislike the show to an extreme degree, because it didn't fulfill its promise of revealing a story that was satisfying. I just think at this point, right, for those of you who are on the fence about this show, I would just say, let's be a little more patient, because it's not the type of show, it's not like a sitcom, right, where you're just kind of watching the show linearly, and at a certain point you're like, I'm done, because I just don't like the show. Because, I mean, let's be honest, right, for example, with a sitcom, you watch the first maybe 10 episodes, and by that point, if you don't get a feel for the show, I mean, unless it's a show that really gets better later on, like Parks and Rec, for example. But let's just say it is what it is, right? You watch the first 10 episodes, and if you don't like the characters, and if you're not on board, chances are you're not going to like the next 9 seasons of the show. And you can kind of, you can say, I'm done, right? That's totally fine. Even the first season or whatever. I don't think a mystery or a show like this that's not presenting itself in a linear fashion is the same, right? I think that there's a lot more nuance to this that we have to take, because I think the show is trying to present itself with a bit more nuance than, a bit more than meets the naked eye. Again, I reserve the right to say episode 5 was so unsatisfying, and by the end of it, because I will probably finish the show no matter what, by episode 8, I'm like, this is terrible. I hate everything about the show. I just have a feeling, though, that by the time everything's revealed about it, and by the way, if, even if we get the answers that are make the show more interesting and more satisfying for the audience, even if that, it's not going to justify the dialogue in the first 4 episodes. It's not going to make some of the visuals better, retroactively, but I just think it might put the story in a better context, and it might make everything make a little more sense. So for me personally, and to you guys out there, if you guys are on the fence about the Acolyte, my hope is that maybe we would have a little bit more patience with the show, because by the time that this podcast comes out, and hopefully I'll put the clip segment out a little bit earlier, a little bit before the 5th episode comes out, that we'll just have this understanding that, yeah, I mean, maybe things will be, maybe things will reveal themselves in ways that were unexpected. It's frustrating because the Netflix model of, shows where they drop all the episodes at once might have actually benefited a show like this a little bit more. Again, I don't know. There's something about like watching this episode week to week that maybe is frustrating to a lot of Star Wars fans. I'm not sure. But again, those are just my thoughts about the show. I know that a lot of people are frustrated, and I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments down below. And with that, guys, that is it for today's episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod. We had a lot to talk about. I know this episode ran a lot longer. Thank you guys, though, for sticking with it. And if you enjoyed it, if you are liking the return of the podcast, let me know in the comments down below. Timestamps for all the individual clips and all the individual segments are in the description of the YouTube video, as well as in the description of the Spotify version as well. And yeah, thank you guys again so much for listening. Refer to the beginning of this episode for future updates about the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel. And yeah, I will see you guys next week. And until then, thanks so much for listening.